We're joined by two experts to discuss the implications of this case from the perspective of parental rights and religious freedom law. Nicole Neily, president of Parents Defending Education, and attorney Andrea Picciotti-Bayer, director of the Conscience Project. Ladies, thank you for joining us. Andrea, oral argument on Wednesday was full of discussion about status use distinctions. Let's listen to Chief Justice Roberts' comments on that.
Well, and one religion says that's what they do with education, and the other religion says, no, we use it to propagate the faith. So it is the beliefs of the two religions that determines whether or not their schools are going to get the funds or not. And we have said that that is the most basic violation of the First Amendment religion clauses, for the government to draw distinctions between religions based on their doctrine.
Can you explain the status use distinction for our audience?
You know, Montse, it's very interesting. Prior to the oral argument, I thought I understood the status use distinction as being a distinction without much of a difference. And this was an issue that the government in Maine was trying to point out. They weren't discriminating against schools because they were religious. They were choosing not to involve schools because of the use of religion or the role of religion in their education. But as I was listening to argument on Wednesday, it really seemed like Chief Justice Roberts and the other justices were looking at this more from a traditional discrimination lens, that they were choosing to allow education, if it was private, to come in if it had no trace of religion to it, and discriminate against religious schools where religion was going to be woven through the education. So it started off being, I wonder if this is going to be a distinction without a difference, to really centering us back to the critical issue of, is religion being discriminated against in this school program? And I think at least 6 of the justices said, yes, it is, and that's unconstitutional.
Well, we're going to get to your predictions on this case in a moment, but Nicole, let's talk about your role defending parental rights in education. Why is this case and this issue so significant to you?
Sure. This case is fascinating because we have seen over the past 2 years, as children have been stuck at home doing Zoom school, parents have been horrified about the kinds of things that their children are learning because suddenly classrooms were in people's living rooms. So they were disappointed in what was being taught, what wasn't being taught, learning loss not being addressed. The war on merit, gifted programs being phased out. And I think overall, people have realized how disenfranchised they are by the school system. And again, I mean, this is being done to our children with our tax dollars in our name. And so the fact remains that once people know what is going on in their public school system, they want an out. And often case, you know, those that where they want to go to are, you know, their parochial schools, their religious schools. And so school choice is such an essential component of addressing the rot in our school system. And so, you know, yesterday's case or argument was really important, and we're going to be watching it closely.
That's very interesting. We'll get to that a little bit more in a second. Andrea, there were also some discussions around government speech and claims that allowing the money to follow the student wherever they choose to go amounts to the government taking a position on religion. Why is that relevant here?
You know, it's very interesting. We do have part of our First Amendment, a prohibition on the government establishing a religion. And there are some opponents to school choice. And in this case, they're saying Maine is basically guarding against the government creating a religion. Well, what came out of the argument is, in Maine's case, there's actually more involvement by the government in reviewing curriculum of religious schools and in entangling itself into it than it will if you just allow parents to make a free choice to the school that best fits their children. You know, so it seems like it's a bit of a red herring to claim that the Maine school sectarian rule is a way to guard against an establishment clause problem or an establishment issue. And instead, what they've set up is one that gets the government looking into textbooks, looking into proposed curriculum. That's the kind of problem that we want to avoid. And allowing parents to choose and basically enabling that choice is a way that we avoid any kind of establishment issues in the first place.
Nicole, there was a back and forth between Justice Alito and Mr. Taub, the lawyer representing the state of Maine, that begs 2 questions. Let's listen first.
Suppose parents want to send their child using this money to an elite private school, Exeter, Andover, Miss Porter's. That would be okay, right?
Yes, those schools would likely be approved.
And they would provide the equivalent of a rough equivalent of a public education?
Yes, they would.
They would?
Yes. The defining feature of a public education is that it's religiously neutral. Now, you could go to Andover.
So when you say a public education, all you mean is a secular education. That's what you mean.
That is the defining feature.
Why do the choices for parents and students have to be limited to non-religious schools? Was it surprising that very expensive elite schools were okay, but a parochial school would have been out of the question? Nikki.
Well, it turns out that it's choice for me, but not for thee, right? I mean, who are the kinds of children who want to get out of failing public schools? They're poor children, right? And these, the kinds of schools that these, elite think it's okay to send their children to, Exeter, Andover. I mean, it doesn't make, families at the end of the day want to choose the school that best fits their needs, be it religious, be it gifted, be it special needs. And often, those cases or those opportunities come up in religious schools. And so for the government, for the state to draw this distinction between who can and can't get the money, to me, it's confusing and it's disappointing. And it really shows that, that they want to make decisions for us, and they don't want families involved in that process whatsoever.
The second question is for you, Andrea. Mr. Taub insisted various times in argument that the defining feature of public education is that it's secular. Why did he insist on that, and is he correct?
Well, I think it's curious. I think he insists on that because that serves his argument. It's something that all parents in Maine and all parents across the country should stand up and say, what? That's the defining feature of a public education. It's not academic rigor. It's not instilling a sense of citizenship or developing job skills or preparing for higher education, but religion neutrality. And I think that's really where we see a disconnect and maybe a movement among progressive secularists to take over public education, stripping it of its religious foundation, but not being concerned about what's left.
And you said something really important right now. It's religious foundation. The original schools, as we know them, were Protestant schools. They did take a position on religion at the moment that just after our Constitution was created, and state-level constitutions were created too. And we saw anti-Catholic bias there as well. Did we hear any of that in argument?
It's interesting, hearkening back to the Blaine amendments of the late 1800s. This case isn't about a Blaine amendment, but it's kind of like Blaine 2.0. Instead of being anti-Catholic, these programs, and Maine's program is anti-religion. Its sectarian rule excludes religion from the educational background or horizon for children. And that's something that most parents know is part of their family, especially people of faith. It's part of their family's culture, and they want that to be something not just limited to a Sunday school experience.
Right. Nicole, we watched the Virginia elections this year and various moves around the country to focus on school board elections as well. How is this week's case related to that effort, and is there anything that we glean from it that will be useful to you?
Sure. I love Andrea's point about, where values are and people not wanting that to be restricted just to Sundays, because I think that's an essential element of a lot of the unhappiness we've seen from families. We see schools now sort of in an adversarial position against a lot of families. Teachers feeling it's their mission to deprogram children from the values that they learn at home. We see teachers with their TikTok saying, you can't keep an eye on me for 8 hours during the day. And people are horrified by that. They expect their children to go to school to learn to read, to write, but not to learn all, social engineering and social justice. We have seen astonishing learning loss over the past several years, which parents are deeply, deeply concerned about. Yet schools are spending finite time and money buying divisive books and talking about issues that families would rather discuss at home in a family setting on their time.
Andrea, can you predict for us what the outcome of this case will be when we can expect a decision?
I wish I could be 100% accurate in my predictions, but I think I'm getting close. After hearing oral argument, I believe it's going to be a win for the parents in Maine, and it hopefully will not be limited to just a Maine program, but really open doors for more creativity across the country. This is a big case. It's a really big case in a term where there are lots of big cases. So we probably will hear the court's decision at the end of the term, which happens to coincide with at the end of the school year in June. It could come before then. And what I do think we should encourage all of our state lawmakers to get ready and start putting on the books more options so that parents have greater mobility And that's actually going to be healthy competitions for our public schools as well.
Well, we'll be watching both of you, and we look forward to having you back to discuss the decision in the spring or the summer. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Montse.